So, the American Postal Workers Union recently announced that the USPS has chosen 4 pilot cities to experiment with the return of postal banking, which is the idea of allowing post offices to conduct basic banking services. So, these cities are Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Falls Church, Virginia, and the Bronx in New York City. Now, the program, at least so far, is limited. It will allow customers to cash payroll checks or business checks up to $500 and have that money put onto a single use gift card. But if this is successful and if advocates keep the pressure on, this could lead to a vast expansion of the financial services post offices offer. And it may not seem like a big deal at first, but this could significantly improve the lives of millions of Americans. And think about it, many places, especially small towns, rural areas, high poverty areas of cities, do not have easy access to banking services. Many poor people rely on predatory payday loan and check cashing establishments when they're in urgent need of money, which often fuels a vicious cycle of debt. And Megan Day wrote about this in Jacobin, saying 1 in 4 US households is unbanked or underbanked, meaning they're fully or partially boxed out of traditional financial services. Those 68 million people represent a growing market for payday loan sharks and spend an average of 10% of their yearly income on the high interest and fees that go with alternative financial services, roughly the same proportion they spend on food. On the other hand, post offices are located in every community, every zip code of the country. In fact, 60% of post offices are located in zip codes with only one or no bank branches. Under postal banking, customers would only be charged a very small flat fee for services without any interest. And we can also think about this as a racial justice issue. Black and Hispanic people are disproportionately unbanked, and the payday loan industry is especially strong in poor Black and brown neighborhoods. A full fledged postal banking system would drive out this predatory industry. And this is not a really innovative idea. We had postal banking in this country from 1911 to 1967. At its peak, during World War II, 4 million Americans had savings accounts at post offices. During the war, $8 million was raised for defense bonds sold through postal banks. And it's no coincidence that the predatory lending industry gained steam in the 1970s, right after postal banking was eliminated. And this issue has gained more public attention in recent years, thanks to none other than our dear Bernie Sanders, who talked about it a lot during his 2016 and 2020 presidential runs. And so let's take a look at this clip from him on the Jimmy Kimmel Show.
We have millions and millions of low-income people who have to go to these payday lenders and pay outrageous interest rates. They're getting ripped off right and left. We can have our postal service provide modest banking to low-income people where they can cash their checks and they can do banking. I think it will help the post office and it will help millions of low-income people.
The American Postal Workers Union, or APWU, has also been pushing on this issue for years. They actually negotiated postal banking as part of its collective bargaining agreement in 2016, but the Postmaster General has failed to enforce it. Let's listen to the APWU Legislative Director, Judy Beer, talk about why they support postal banking.
When you're campaigning and driving through neighborhoods and other communities, and even your own community, you may not see a bank for 10 miles. In fact, in many cases, these areas, these residents don't have banks for 10 miles from their home. And many of you may not have a bank 10 miles from your home. These are called bank deserts. In 2012, these unserved working class families paid $89 million on an average of $2,400 per 25,000 family income to what we call loan sharks, bank payday lenders, check cashing companies. 10% of their budget on interest and fees. The United States Postal Service already has a presence in low-income and rural communities.
Postal banking is also part of the solution to the Postal Service's financial issues. So, first of all, we should acknowledge that the main reason the USPS has financial problems is because of the ridiculous pre funding mandate, which requires them to pre fund the pensions of their employees 65 years in advance, something no other public or private entity has to do. But regardless of if that mandate exists or not, postal banking would bring in a whole other stream of revenue to keep the Postal Service operating at a high standard. It would also expand the employment at the USPS, which offers stable, unionized employment, especially for African Americans and veterans. So, postal banking would be a win win for citizens, for postal workers, and for one of our best public institutions. And this pilot program is a step in the right direction. So, Jen, what do you think? You want postal banking account? Where are you?
I'm definitely here for the postal banking account. Paul, I think I mentioned to you the other day that the USPS where I live has been like flyering like mad about jobs at
Yeah,
the post office. So if Jacobin doesn't work out, if Jacobin goes down the drain,
right,
I could be working at USPS. But in all seriousness, I think that the point that you made about the rise of high interest, like predatory payday lenders kind of coinciding with the collapse of postal banking is very salient. Bank desert is a great phrase, and I think that it obviously is very prevalent in low income communities. But I guess a question I have for you is something you did not touch on is the role of evil Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, who kind of was a Trump crony and kind of emerged during the Trump years as
right,
this figurehead who of kind of postal service self-sabotage, right? Like there were a lot of fears
right,
that he was actually going to try to actively dismantle the post office. I think one of the fears, which I think was later debunked, was that he was like removing post office boxes right
hmm
before the election. But I would be interested to hear whether you have thoughts on his role in working with the union to kind of make postal banking happen, at least in this pilot program, because at least from what I understand, he actually seemed pretty open to it, which seems unusual for him. I mean, he still has a host of other problems, but do you know more about that?
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of interesting. So, DeJoy and postal management was open to this. They are doing this pilot program. Now, I will say this, um, if some of DeJoy's other policies continue like they are, it will kind of be a mute point because like they will eliminate the potential for this program to expand. Because again, this pilot program is extremely limited. It's not the full vision of postal banking that the union wants. And some of you might have heard about DeJoy's 10-year plan. So, and I think this issue, everyone was paying attention before the presidential election. Postal workers were like heroes for a week. I felt very validated in my obsession. But I think people have kind of forgot, but this issue is still very live. So, he released his 10-year plan and actually already he's starting to cut hours at post offices, to send a mail across the country. Before it was like a 2 to 3 day standard. They've extended that to 5 days that it will take. So they're cutting hours of workers, cutting
Mhm.
hours of offices, cutting services in different respects. So the problem is, it's good that they've been open to this pilot program, but if they keep on this train, and many think this is a plan to privatize ultimately because if service is going to decline, they're going to lose the loyalty of the public and customers. This could be a stealth privatization plan. So,
Mhm.
I think it could be an issue that if they get this pilot program out, but then the USPS is losing funding and losing credibility, it's going to hurt their ability to expand this operation. So, so this is another thing people should be paying attention to. Louis DeJoy is still there. He can only be removed by the Postal Board of Governors. So Biden has appointed some new good people, but the problem is not all of them agree on removing DeJoy. So this problem is still with us that we should be
Mhm.
paying attention to. Yeah,
To kind of connect the post office to what I talked about, and I know that you've mentioned this on the show before. The post office is like wildly popular. Like there's like
right,
no other institution in the US that is as popular as the post office, right? Like isn't it like something like over 90% approval
right.
rating?
91%. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
right,
that
yeah.
cuts across Democrat, Republicans, and I think. And look, I know this demand of postal banking, it's not as revolutionary or whatever as something like Medicare for all. But I think this is an interesting thing that people on the left or groups like DSA can organize around in their local areas. Because, again, the Postal Workers Union has been pushing for pilot programs in specific areas. And I think there's potential to mount these campaigns in other cities. And I'm hoping to try and do one in Philadelphia at some point to pressure, to put out there to experiment with a pilot program. And again, I think it's something that could unite a large base of people. It's also something that, if anything, might get more support in rural areas, again, that don't have a lot of banking access. And I think many of us on the left are feeling lost about what to do. And I think an issue like Medicare for all, which is probably more compelling than postal banking, but we're dealing with a complete blockage at the congressional level. So sometimes it's hard to campaign around that. But, an issue like postal banking, it's maybe a little bit lower hanging fruit, easier to get people involved in. It creates a good partnership with a union like APWU, which, by the way, had endorsed Bernie Sanders in both elections. I think they've endorsed Medicare for all, so they're not enemies of the left. So it's something people should think about in their own area.
I do want to go back to this issue, or like this talking point, I guess, that the postal banking will also help create a revenue stream for the Postal Service. I mean, that is, absolutely a good thing, I think. But at the same time, like, I think I saw somewhere that the flat fee that they are rolling out, in these pilot areas is something like $5.95 or something, which again is a lot lower than obviously any of the payday lenders, that are already in existence. I think it's also lower than like what it costs to cash a check at like a Walmart or something. But I think, I think what's interesting, again, to go back to, the 91% of people who approve of the post office is that the post office has been losing money for like kind of a long time, and people like it anyway. And I think that there is, I'm not saying that, obviously I think that the USPS should be solvent, but like, I think the point is that people are used to kind of thinking of the post office as like a public good, and not something that necessarily has to like break even or let alone turn a profit.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. And and for years it really operated on just essentially breaking even. And again, like there can be no overstating that the central problem is this pre-funding mandate. And again, this is a law passed in 2006. They have to pre-fund pensions 65 years in advance for all of their employees. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So like if you remove that, and there is some bipartisan momentum around repealing that law, which I think would be huge. That really is a central issue for funding. But yeah, I think you're right. People don't expect it to make a profit.
Do you know if the union has any thoughts on the pre-funding?
Yeah, I mean, they're all totally opposed to it. And there are 4 different postal unions. Really getting into the weeds here, but there's your letter carriers, the people that you see on the street delivering mail. The APWU is representing the clerks. There's the mail handlers and the mail processors. But on that issue, I think all 4 unions are united in being opposed to that. Because again, it's just ridiculous. It's very clear what it was about. It's just trying to create a problem so you can eventually privatize it. But if anyone brings that issue up, always bring up the pre-funding mandate. That is number one talking point about why, that is the real financial problem with the Postal Service.
I will say that, going off something that you had mentioned earlier about how like letter carriers kind of became like one of the like unsung heroes of the, pandemic, like along with other essential workers. I think that kind of cultural shift has actually sort of put the brakes on a lot of people screeching about how the post office should be privatized, or how like UPS or FedEx should take them over. I remember that was like a thing that was bubbling up for a while, not just on the right, but among like kind of technocratic liberals as well. And I don't know, like, have you felt like that's dissipated a little bit?
Yeah, and it's one of these contradictory things with the Trump era. So like things like this, because it started to be viewed as a Trump thing, like there's this overwhelming outpouring of support. And I think
like charter schools or something.
And right, exactly. And again, this is where I think there's potential for campaigning, like mobilizing on that sentiment from last year that is probably still there, I think you can mount interesting public campaigns around postal banking. And, we can think bigger than that. There's also proposals to, what if you had electric car charging stations at every post office? You could also process licenses, hunting licenses, like all kinds of things you could just do at the post office. It would be, cost people less money. And again, like, think about expanding employment. I think the median salary at the post office is around $60,000 a year. 21% of postal workers are African Americans, a large proportion of veterans. Like, it's really I think there's around 400,000 employees, but if we expand services, you also expand this kind of good employment. So again, everyone wins. This is the kind of stuff we need to be doing.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.